It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all, but was ordered to seal it up until the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation.
The church at Smyrna. Welcome to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we're going to dig into what Smyrna was all about and why the Lord said to Smyrna what he did in the letter.
This is continuing our series through the letters to the churches and to the angels of the churches. And
yes,
again,
that's the thing. It's not just to the people within the pews, if you want to put it that way, although they met in houses at the time. It is addressed specifically to the angels of the churches.
And this is a program this week that may tread in some areas that make some folks uncomfortable just a little bit.
It might just a little bit, because there's the Lord pulls no punches.
No, he doesn't. Telling the truth sounds like hate speech sometimes to the people whose oxes are being gored.
Yes, it sometimes does.
Yes.
Do you have the Revelation 2 verses in front of you?
I do.
You want to read those? And we'll
Revelation 2, beginning at verse 8. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, the words of the first and the last who died and came to life.
Stop. Why would he refer to himself that way?
Well, the first and the last, obviously, he is the creator of all things, and he is the one who will still be standing at the end of this long war.
That's very true, but did you know that the name Smyrna is probably based on the word myrrh?
As in gold, frankincense, and...
As in, it was the main export of that town. And we'll get to the Smyrna in a minute. And if you hear talking in the background, by the way, it's because we're right next door to an office where they are doing some really big things today. But myrrh was the main export of Smyrna. It's the resin of a small tree of the genus Commiphora. It was used in perfume, in incense, in medicine, but also in embalming.
Oh, okay.
In
all
many
right.
ways, Smyrna represented death.
So that was a deeper meaning, which you would not be immediately obvious to those of us in the 21st century, where myrrh is not exactly a household product.
No, it's really not, is it? Although it may be in perfumes.
It is an essential oil that you can buy, but it's not something that most of us keep on the shelf, nor are we using it typically for embalming. Back in the day, those kind of things had to be done by family members, whereas now we've got, companies that take care of that for us.
Very true. So go on, read.
But the first and the last, but also who died and came to life, which relates to the work and the research that we did for our current book, Veneration, about the veneration of the spirits of the dead, or what more appropriately were categorized as the spirits that the people believed, the pagans believed were of the dead, but were in fact the demonic spirits of the deceased Nephilim.
Well, hold that thought, because when we dig a little deeper, we're going to come back to that idea of the dead. When we get to how the city was established.
Ah, okay. Because as we have learned in our study for the book Veneration, that all of this is about who is restored to life at the end. I mean, most of us as Christians understand that there's a time coming, as Paul wrote, that once we're absent from the body, we are present with the Lord in the Spirit. And Jesus in the Spirit descended into the abyss and proclaimed to the prisoners there. But as Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, that Jesus was the first fruits of the dead, and his resurrection is essentially the template for all of us.
Absolutely. And that becomes even more important later in this letter. But let's go ahead and talk about the establishment in Smyrna.
Okay.
Because there was Smyrna proper, the old city of Smyrna, which was right on the sea. It was on essentially a peninsula. Then there was New Smyrna. New Smyrna was established by the general one of the generals who followed Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great, this is the legend, when Alexander the Great was in old Smyrna proper, he was led to a hillside and decided that he was going to rest beneath a tree, probably this tree that produced myrrh. So it was sort of a tree of death, if you want to call it that. Mm-hmm. And while he was beneath the tree, he either had a real visitation or a dream about two goddesses who were both named Nemesis.
Oh.
So they are called the Nemesis. Mm-hmm. Whether they were twins or two aspects of the same Nemesis goddess is unclear, but Nemesis was a sister to Hypnos and Thanatos, the two gods of the dead.
Sleep and death.
Yes.
Okay. So what were the characteristics?
So there are a lot of associations to Smyrna and death.
So now what were the characteristics of the Nemesis or Nemesis?
Well, they had a lot of characteristics. Primarily it was vengeance. If somebody did you wrong, you prayed to Nemesis and she would vindicate you. She would avenge you. So she carried a lot of war implements that she used to wreak vengeance upon your enemies. But Nemesis also means enemy. It also means adversary. So the idea of the Synagogue of Satan, which we're going to read about in a minute, that also refers to the Synagogue of the Nemesis.
Oh, okay. Right. Nemesis in the modern English understanding would denote that kind of meaning.
Exactly. In fact, there is a supposed black sun that is the companion to our Sol, the sun of our solar system. It is called, by astronomers, Nemesis.
Right. That's one of those bodies in the solar system that astronomers or some believe.
It's a binary star.
Right. They haven't found it yet, but they're still looking.
They theorized.
So Nemesis, very interesting that this is attached to Smyrna.
Exactly. So when you see, I am the first and the last who died and came to life, there's a lot in there.
Yes, more than just, more
than
you get
we
on the surface reading,
yes.
which is how, and I'm guilty of having read it. You think you understand it because you understand the modern English, but the cultural, historic, and religious culture of the first century has to be considered when we're trying to understand this. This is, okay, well, we'll go ahead to verse 9 here. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. That's in parentheses. And the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan.
Boy, that second part, that's going to really take some time to unpack. And again, as Derek said, you may find your toe stepped on a little bit because the Lord is well known for stepping on toes.
Yeah.
The tribulation and your poverty, we'll get to tribulation second. Poverty, it was one of the richest cities because of their export. It was on the Hermus River. I believe it was Hermus, but the river that it sat on, it was not the Hermus. Give me a second. It was the Melis River. Hermus was nearby, and this is really interesting because this whole area that includes all 7 of these churches was called Lydia.
Okay.
As in the song.
Right.
No, it was Lydia. I knew you were thinking it. But as far as
what other program on Bible prophecy will you get a kind of a veiled reference to the Marx Brothers?
But the river Melis is a goddess. Many of these rivers, a god. Many of these rivers were deified. That's typical back in the day. And you get to the idea of fresh water and salt water, that there are deities in both. Well, this river god, Melis, was supposed to have been the father of the poet Homer.
Really? I did not know that.
Yep. The Melis stream had its headwaters on the slopes of Mount Sipylos, flowing west into the Aegean near the town Smyrna. This area was written about by Homer. He supposedly grew up there. I don't think he died there, but it was the place of a very famous Christian's death. Polycarp died in Smyrna.
Yes.
Another reference to tribulation and dying. And in fact, we're going to find out that many of those who attended his burning, because he was burnt at the stake, were those who called themselves Jews.
Oh, now Polycarp was a disciple of John the Revelator. And it is a...
He was bishop at the church.
Right, right. In fact, if I remember correctly, Polycarp was then a teacher for Irenaeus.
Yes, yes,
who
I
was
think
a
you're right.
very prominent theologian of the early church in the 2nd century. So when Irenaeus writes on end times prophecy, as he did, and speculated that the gematria, the numerical value 666 of the Antichrist equals Titan.
Titans, yes.
Yeah, it's and also postulated that the Antichrist would present himself to the world as a Jew, probably from the tribe of Dan. You have to wonder, was that something that Irenaeus arrived at on his own, or is this something that was perhaps transmitted from John through Polycarp to Irenaeus? Interesting.
Well, while we're speaking of gods and goddesses, and then we'll go back to this verse and try to continue to unpack, especially the synagogue of Satan. Gods and goddesses played a major role in all of the ancient world. That region, because it had such an important, not only militarily, but also because of commerce, it was constantly going back and forth between the Roman and the Greek empires. At the time that it was about to be conquered by Antiochus III, Smyrna turned to Rome and said, please come help us. We want to be under your protection. One of the local goddesses sort of was created at the time, and it may have been based on Nemesis, was Roma.
Roma.
The people of Smyrna named her Roma. And she was built a huge temple in Smyrna, and the Roman soldiers who came down there started to think she's pretty great. The description of Roma reminds me a lot of Inanna. She is not only worshipped by soldiers because she has warrior aspects, which Nemesis did, but she also has not priestesses, as most goddesses do, but priests who serve her.
That is
Inanna
interesting.
was well known for her castrated priests.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes, so that the Roman soldiers took the worship of Roma back to Rome, which is, of course, in Italian called Roma.
Makes sense.
Exactly. Well, Rome had its own, pantheon at the time, but despite that, because of the Roman soldiers' fondness for this goddess, she became very big in Rome. When Augustus became the Caesar, he wanted to deify Julius because he had been assassinated,
Sure.
and so apotheosis was the natural next step. So part of that was agreeing to bring in other deities that the Roman soldiers, in order to support me, says Augustine, says Augustus, okay, we can worship Roma as well. So essentially, Julius was worshipped as a god in Smyrna alongside Roma. And he was also worshipped in Rome alongside Roma. When Augustus became a god, he was often portrayed in subservience to Roma.
That's interesting.
She's on a lot of the coins. And you will see, it'll actually say Roma on the coin, and you will see she's wearing a military hat.
Which
a
again
helmet
suggests that she was just another aspect or...
of Inanna.
Yeah. Now, you've talked about that before. I like the illustration you used. How is it possible that these entities in the ancient world could manifest with different names?
Have so many faces?
Have so many faces.
Well, you've talked about how they use avatars, as if so if you're familiar with online gaming.
Second Life.
Yeah,
even.
Second Life, you can have whatever avatars you want. It's just a pretend self, a cartoon version of yourself in Second Life. But what I believe the gods and goddesses do, and it doesn't matter if they're in Tartarus or not, because they can affect our world through their own little demons. They will have these demons wear all sorts of little hats and guises. So if I hold up my 10 fingers and I put a finger puppet on each one, I have 10 different entities that I control.
Right.
I can even make them appear to hate one another and to fight one another and to compete against one another. But it's all me.
I think that's a good way of visualizing the way the spirit realm interacts with ours. They're operating in more dimensions than we are. They're much older than we are.
Yes.
And they've got access to a lot more information and a lot more memory than we do.
Very much so. But the bottom line is they're playing checkers and the Lord is playing infinite dimension chess.
Right, right. Well, we need to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll talk more about the Synagogue of Satan and what we think that is, why we think that's relevant, and also, I think, discuss a little bit as to why Smyrna was one of the 2 churches that didn't receive any criticism from Jesus. That's ahead on Unraveling Revelation.
Unveiling the ancient realms of demonic kings and Satan's battle plan for Armageddon. Skywatch TV is proud to announce 2 new special offers. The Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series. First, in Derek and Sharon Gilbert's new groundbreaking book, Veneration, you will learn how the giants of old shaped the worldview and religion of the Hebrews, and the role they will play in the end times. How veneration of the dead brought disaster on the Israelites. Concealed references of ancestor worship among the Canaanites, and so much more. But for a limited time only, when you purchase Veneration from Skywatch TV, you'll also receive Realms of the Dead, Book 6 in the Red Wing Saga from Sharon K. Gilbert, that explores the true historical link between Mount Hermon and Jack the Ripper. The key characters of this supernatural thriller will face their most terrifying challenge yet, as a powerful new watcher has joined the confrontation that could bring forth the Antichrist and the end of days. But that's not all. You'll also receive the brand new DVD documentary, The Search for the Raphaim, where Derek and Sharon Gilbert take you on a guided tour of the Holy Land, ground zero in the long war with the fallen realm. You will see mysterious Gilgal Raphaim created for the veneration of the dead, the plains of Moab, where worshiping the god of the underworld brought disaster on Israel, and bonus teachings by guests like Pastor Carl Gallups and Messianic Rabbi Zev Parat. And for a limited time only, you'll receive absolutely free the brand new reprinting of the original 1921 classic work, Immortality and the Unseen World, which reveals the Hebrew concepts of the supernatural realm, death, angels, and demons. Sold separately, this exclusive offer retails for $90. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. But wait, now you have the option to upgrade and expand your collection by including all 5 previously released books in the Red Wing Saga, where you'll learn spiritual warfare through gripping stories with characters you'll love. The expanded collection, which includes all 8 books and The Search for the Rephaim DVD documentary, holds a retail value of $190. Yours now for your donation of only $100 plus shipping and handling. So don't delay. Order the Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we are talking about the church of Smyrna. And one of the things that the Lord says to them, and first of all, you're right, He does not criticize them and tell them that they don't seem to have done anything wrong.
No, they are bound for tribulation. We see that in verse 10 where Jesus says, "Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation."
Yes.
Now, let's back up to the Synagogue of Satan and talk about that, because that's been, I think, misapplied by some Christians in the modern world, saying that those...
Now, but I'm going to just start out by saying, what we're about to tell you here, these are opinions from many scholars. So there are essentially 2 schools of thought on this.
Right.
And we are not saying we believe one over the other, but I think that they're really important, especially one of them is very much relevant today.
The Synagogue of Satan, those who say that they are Jews and are not, there's a belief among some Christians today that the Jews in Israel, which is a Jewish state for the most part. The majority of the world's Jews live in Israel now. There is a belief by some that these are not true Jews, that because Judaism was changed after the first century and became Talmudic Judaism, which has drifted in some circles into a mystical teaching with the Kabbalah, which is really drifting away from the teachings that were given to Moses.
Yeah, it's really New Age.
Right. Yeah, that these are those who say that they are Jews and are not. And I'll be honest, I think this is can be used as a convenient excuse for anti-Semitism. It's I think, a dangerous teaching.
The one thing we need to remember in the Old Testament, when the Lord says if someone comes to you, a sojourner, that means someone from another tribe, comes and lives with you and says, I want to worship Yahweh, then he becomes part of your tribe.
Sure. We see in the genealogy of Jesus that there are those who came in from outside. Rahab, the harlot in the city of Jericho, was one of the Amorites who lived there, one of the Canaanites, and Ruth was a Moabite.
Right.
So there were those who came in from the outside and became Jews ultimately by being grafted in, just as we as Christians have been grafted in. So I think we're on a slippery slope if we presume to say, you might claim to be a Jew, but you're really not.
Right.
And so we don't have to treat you as God's chosen people.
Right.
I think that's a very dangerous, that's replacement theology.
I so agree with you there. And in fact, I earlier said 2 schools of thought. Actually, there are 3 because I'd forgotten about that one. The other 2, one of them is that that the Lord was referring to Jews at the time who had not accepted him. In other words, a true Jew was someone who was a completed Jew.
Ah, yes.
But that's probably not what it is. There are also those who think it may have been Christians who were adapting and adopting Jewish ways and saying, if you don't do these feasts, if you don't do these things, if you don't behave in these ways, follow the law along with us, then you are not a Christian.
Judaizers.
There were lots of them, and some of the Judaizers would come in and say, okay, you have to be circumcised first. You essentially have to go through the Jewish, baptism, if you want to call it that, of blood to be circumcised. But then you go through the Lord's baptism. You have to be a Jew before you can be a Christian. That's just not right.
That was rejected by the Council of Jerusalem in Acts chapter 15.
Exactly. All come to Christ.
Yes.
There's not an intermediary before you get to Christ.
Right. The church in Jerusalem, which was headed up by Jesus' half-brother James, said, look, just avoid sexual immorality, don't eat meat sacrificed to idols, eat meat with the blood in it, and you'll do well. They weren't going to put any of the other burdens that they admitted the Jews and their fathers had not been able to bear on the Gentiles who were coming to faith in Jesus Christ. This was prompted by Paul and Barnabas, who were saying, look, we're witnessing to Gentiles, and there's a dispute that's arisen as to whether they need to be circumcised to get into the club.
Now, here's another thing that was going on at the time. According to scholars, at the time, because of the really dire tribulation that they were going on, they were being arrested constantly. They were having to hide. They were third-class citizens, if you want to call them that,
right.
If they were citizens at all. When they were found out, they were arrested, probably didn't have a trial, and then they were killed. And the methods of execution were probably terrible. One way to avoid this was to say you were Jewish.
Ah, okay.
To hide behind the mask
right.
of being a Jew.
Right. Well, the believers in Smyrna, even though Smyrna was a very prosperous city because of its location on a trade route that connected the Aegean world to the rest of Asia Minor.
And to these rivers that allowed the ships to go right up into the cities.
Right. And this was a big city, too. Smyrna, it's estimated, during the time that John wrote, had probably 100,000 people. That's 3 times more people than in our whole county right now.
Well, yeah, it had a theater that had seats for 20,000.
So, yes, a big metropolitan area. But whenever you had a wealthy community that had a number of trades that were prosperous, you had a guild that decided who was admitted to the guild, and there were procedures for making sure that you were properly trained and whatever. But there was also, the secret handshake kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And if you were a Christian in that period of time, just as with the silversmiths in Ephesus that we talked about, if you ran afoul of the guild by proclaiming to we don't worship the gods. We worship the God, Yahweh. You probably didn't get into the guild if you didn't participate in that economy by learning the secret handshake. And there are certain equivalences today where if you don't know the secret handshake, you don't get certain opportunities. But it was even more so back in the ancient world when the Christians were a minority, a small minority, surrounded by a pagan majority. So this led to some hardship. And Jesus said, look, don't fear what you're about to suffer, because he knew that they were behind enemy lines, as we are today, but for them even more so.
It's interesting in this church because we talked about how the seven churches sort of unveil a timeline of the Christian church throughout history up until present day. And I think many believe that we have two churches going now, Philadelphia and Laodicea. But I would argue that there are aspects to all seven of the churches going on even today, because there are those who are being persecuted, not necessarily here in the United States, but in other countries. They are undergoing dire persecution, and they are hiding. And if you don't hide, if you're found out in some areas like in China, if you're preaching the gospel, then you are arrested, and many times you are killed. So that was what was going on in Smyrna. So you can understand why, in order to protect his family, a man might say, no, I'm Jewish. But the problem is that some of these Christians hiding behind Jewish identity were also turning in their friends. That's, I believe, another aspect of the Synagogue of Satan. It's reminiscent of what was going on in Hitler's Germany at the time that some were turning in fellow Jews.
Sure. And as we go back to the timeline of church age history that we discussed a few weeks ago, Smyrna, again, just to remind viewers, would be representative of the church from about the time of John's death, around the 100 AD or thereabouts, up until the time Constantine legalized Christianity to about 312, 313 AD. But as you say, there are still aspects of that church that are with us even to this day, into the 21st century.
After all of this, though, Lord, the Lord goes on to say, do not fear what you are about to suffer. After you've gone through tribulation and poverty, you've been slandered, the synagogue of Satan is against you, and then he says to them, what you're about to suffer.
And we'll have to talk about that next week.
Yes.
Because we're just about out of time.
We've only gotten through 2 verses.
Well, that's how it works here as we go through these verses in the book of Revelation and try to make sense of it. It's how we handle our weekly Bible study at gilberthouse.org.
We crawl through it.
We thank you for watching. This is Unraveling Revelation from Skywatch TV.